So this time I'm going for like 500 or 600 people. Cody's speaking, Tarek is speaking.
You've sold it out just from your Instagram or your YouTube?
Yeah.
Dang, that's
Hard,
amazing.
man. I'm like, every time it comes around right now, I'm like, oh, I'm officially in the begging people to go to my conference
Well,
time of the year, you know?
we're always selling.
Yeah, I know.
We're always selling
Yeah.
something.
You're next. You're next
Yeah.
on the host
Hit
on
me.
stage.
I would love that.
1 year from now.
Let's do that.
It's really great, man. And it's like cool to see my community, my students, people that are like very appreciative of everything. And
Who helps you put it together?
my
You
wife.
guys,
Yeah.
you're so gnarly.
Yeah. she's
You're
great.
like, dang, that's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah. She's never put together events or anything, but she crushes it, man. And honestly, it's like the best. I've been to a lot of short-term rental and mid-term rental conferences. They're always good, but like I think it really is the best. And like there's something really magical about it. Stuff doesn't go wrong. Like I can't believe it. Every time I'm just like, that worked. So
Yeah, I feel that about stuff often.
yeah. Yeah. Do you live events or no?
Oh no,
Oh, okay.
our business is so like one thing and like pretty basic.
But surely there must be like a self-storage conference type
There's
circuit, right?
Yeah, there are conferences that we go to. For the, I don't know if you're looking at like the social media like type of conferences. I could go to
Oh, sure.
AJ's storage conference. AJ who does it with Britt. And then we go to a couple storage and multifamily conferences, but they're it's like institutional
Sure.
style conferences.
Got it.
So it's like huge hedge funds and I don't know.
That makes sense.
I think it's good that we go, but I don't know. It feels not aligned with us either, though, if that
Oh,
makes
really?
sense. Yeah, because we don't raise money from institutional investors. Like we
Oh,
raise our
okay.
money through same way you would. Like
I think that's how I got Tarek to kind of we're kind of buds. Like we text. We're not super close or anything, but I interviewed him on BP and we actually I followed up with them. We had lunch and I thought it was going to be pretty tough to, I mean, it actually kind of was. I had to, he said no last year. This year I was like, can't say no. And he was like, all right, I'll do it. But I think it's because he wants to get in front of my audience and see who he can help, who he can get, to raise. And he wants to raise for my audience and I'm down to raise for him and stuff like that. So, but I try to have a wild card type of thing outside of the short-term rental space for every conference. So yeah, next year, come talk about self-storage.
yeah, I would love that.
We'll make it sexy.
Let's do it.
Let's Airbnb out one of your self-storage units.
Dude.
Can we do that? That'd be a
No,
great promo.
We cannot do that. We cannot do that. First off, thank you for coming.
Oh, my
that was a
gosh.
trek to get you here.
I'm honored.
And two, you're one of those people that I admire because you built a real estate portfolio yourself. You built a YouTube portfolio. You're a YouTube following.
A portfolio of people.
A portfolio of people.
Yeah, uh-huh.
You're the host of Bigger Pockets. You do live events. You have educational series. I mean, you are doing a lot, and you always build it yourself, and then eventually bring on people. But you're still very hands on. How do you do that? How are you doing all that, and still so involved in each thing?
Yeah, I'm absolutely the bottleneck for every aspect of my business. I'm very self-aware. My team always needs me to do things, but I really restrict myself from doing too many new things. If I do something, I kind of go all in. And I get so many business opportunities, so many people pitching me, hey, come in as an equity partner for this part of the short-term rental industry on this service. And I just say no to everything. And I really focus on the couple of things that I'm good at, which is content, teaching people, and then actually doing the real estate thing. And then everything else is the conference. That's something that we just started about a year and a half ago. That was kind of hard. Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, I just choose not to sleep. But then again, I mean, you probably are in the same way. You got 4 kids. You're busy.
I'm not sleeping either.
Yeah.
I get it all the time.
Yeah.
I'll do content and I'll look tired because I am tired, right?
You're
and I'll get in the
tired. Are you
comments
eating enough?
What's that?
Are you eating enough? I'm worried about you.
I think I'm eating enough. This is my thing. So I have 4 kids, right? And our 3 kids, our oldest 3 kids, they were easy sleepers.
Same.
Since they were babies, they slept through the night. And my wife breastfed for pretty long time for each kid. With our newest one, she's a year and a half now. At 6 months, we had all these mold issues with our house, right? Like whole family was getting sick. We didn't know why. It was every week.
Oh, like you were actually like
It was brutal.
the
Black mold
effect. Oh, my
everywhere,
goodness. Okay.
right? And so basically, this is kind of what happened. I decided to run for city council while my wife was pregnant with our fourth, right?
As most people do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And when she was pregnant, she was getting sick, which was not normal for her. Like her first three babies, every time she was pregnant, she'd almost feel better being pregnant than when she wasn't, right?
Oh, okay.
And so she gets pregnant and she's sick, like every week sick. And I'm running the campaign and life's crazy. I'm just like, dang, this is a crazy season, right? We have the baby. And then after the baby's born, my son's sick, my wife's sick, the new baby's sick, like what felt like 2 to 3 times a month. And we're going, what is going on, right? Long story short, my wife is putting my son to sleep, one day for his nap, and she's moving like a toy that hadn't been moved. She picks it up. There's basically mold everywhere coming out of the floor. I mean, it was bad. Wow. So we left the house. We had somebody come and basically check how bad it was, and it was the worst type of mold you could have, and it was everywhere, right? So we all basically left the house. And when it happened, we were floating around in Airbnbs till we found basically a home. And then we started going through
Probably more mold.
Thank God, no more mold, right?
You never know.
We started going through like the detox process with them. Well, what ended up happening, my daughter stopped sleeping through the night. So she was, went from, baby to 6 months sleeping, and then all of a sudden waking up 3 to 4 times a night. And dude, at 40 years old, getting up 4 times a night, that is very different than like the first time we did this when I was 30. And so like that with business and city council, like I'm just like, if I don't sleep well, I'm tired, So all that to say, I am tired. How are you handling it?
I'm always tired. I'm always busy. I'm ADHD. It's really difficult, to be honest. A lot of people ask, are like, how do you do it? I'm like, I don't think I do, but it all kind of works. I've got like a very small team. Like I don't have a lot of employees. I have a full-time editor. I have a full-time COO on my education side of things. I have a COO on my real estate side of things. And outside of that, I mean, I've got some contractors that help me on both sides of the businesses. But for the most part, I'm pretty involved. And I think it's just because like I'm a creative person. Previous to the world of real estate, I was a creative copywriter. And I have a very tough time letting go and letting other people do things that have anything to do with creativity. And I feel like pretty much everything I do, like Airbnb, all about creating a creative experience, YouTube and content, all about creativity and creating, cool content. I have a hard time letting it go. So I am far too involved in the things that I do, but so far I really like doing all of it. So I don't mind it. I don't mind being busy, but I am starting to ramp up to this idea of like, maybe I could chill a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
I saw one of the properties you did. There was a putting green in the back, right? Where was that?
That was in Crystal Beach, Texas. Yeah, it's right outside of Galveston, and all the houses out there pretty much look exactly the same. And so I was like, what can I do to make my property stand out from all of them? So I hired this contractor, came out, he built a putting. Well, no, sorry, he started to, and then he left, and that was a $6,000 mistake on my end. Went around, started asking. I was like, hey, have you seen this guy? Like, where's he at? I'm kind of worried about him. And they're like, oh, you hired, John? Oh, yeah, he's on meth, man. He's known as the meth guy on this town. I'm like, man. And I had worked with him before. I had done projects with him. I had never had the issue. But I guess when he gets on a bender, he gets on a bender. So I had to call in a whole nother contractor from a couple cities over. And then, within 2 weeks, we built a mini putt-putt course. Inexpensive. I mean, it was like a $25,000 putting course, but man, I really feel like that is the best house out there. I'm so proud of that.
Okay, so for Airbnb, what I like about what you're doing is, one, you're separating your home or rental or product from everyone around you. But two, how much of succeeding in Airbnb is based off marketing and getting your home to basically pop off on the high ranking on search, or offering some type of like theme or kind of creative side of it? Is that a big part to succeeding in Airbnb space?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So it's all about marketing, right? It's all about having proper marketing for your Airbnb. A lot of people say, how do you market your Airbnb? They think it's all of these crazy levers that you can pull, and to some capacity it is, but really the main way you can market an Airbnb is having professional photos, having good copy, good listing copy that describes it. And man, I have people that will, it's like, I liken it to like, they hit the ball into outfield, but they only run to first base. And what I mean by this, if I understand baseball correctly, is that they basically spend all this money, like 100,000, 150, 200K, to deck out their house. They make it beautiful, and then they pull out their iPhone 7 and they take photos, and they're like, "We're good." And I'm like, "Man, how are you going to spend six figures on your Airbnb, but not spend $500 on a quality photographer?" I'm a big proponent of that. So I think that's like the number one way that you can stand out, even if it's like a so-so listing. Like good photos will make you will help you rise to the top. And then people will also write one sentence to describe it. You have no idea what this property is, how many rooms they are. They're just like, "Come book my home, newly renovated," and that's it. And it really does take a kind of it. I guess there are a few more back end levers that pulls, but let's say that you have nice photos. So not only does that help people click into your listing, but if people look at your photos, click into your listing, that does help with the algorithm. But what really helps is whenever they look at your photos and they click into your listing and they say, "Oh, I want to book this place," they book it, and then your conversion rate goes up because the moment people book your place, Airbnb says, "Oh, hey, this place books very quickly whenever people click into it." So that helps you rank a lot higher too.
Got it. So you want good photos to be seen, or description and good photos to be seen. And then if you have I mean, in theory, how are you getting people to act? Once they find your property, how can you increase the speed in which they convert and rent it? Is that basically based on the photos?
Kind of, but I think right now we're sort of in what I call like an amenities arm race in the Airbnb space. So like back in the day, you could basically and this is how I started, by the way, so I'm not even poo-pooing the concept. Well, I kind of am, but back in the day, you could put a mattress inside of a living room. And I mean, literally Airbnb, air mattress, B&B, that's kind of like, I think the idea. You would put an air mattress in the living room, rent it out, and make a quick buck, right? And that really did work. And so I think when I got into the industry in like 2017, it was like IKEA, Target, Craigslist free, like anything you could do to just put furniture in there, and you could make a ton of money. I did. Like I had a place in Westchester. It was the first place I ever launched. And I was making like $1,000 to $2,000, and it cost me like $2,000 to furnish max. I was literally like, I was the guy driving around and I'd see a dresser on this side of the road, and my wife would be like, "Babe, don't do this." I'm like, "I have to. I need this dresser." And you could put it in there, and I was making really good money. And I think what happened was a lot of people did that, and they haven't really evolved from that.
Right.
And then we got into this era where, okay, now it's sort of like nicer furniture, nicer design. Target, kind of IKEA, the nicer version of it. And I think people really kind of stayed there, and that worked for like 2018 to 2020, 2021. And then you heard about this Airbnb bust and like everyone going out of business. And for a while, I mean, it was starting to get to me because I'm like, oh, maybe there's something to this. But what I noticed was that all the top properties and all the top, like my students, I know a lot of people in this industry, they weren't suffering. And I was like, okay, what's the deal? And I'd look at their properties, and it kind of got to this point where like everybody was trying to have a nice property, but that was sort of the bare minimum.
Right.
And then having nice photos, also kind of the bare minimum. And you start to kind of punch into the best performers in the market, and they all have things like game rooms, arcades, theater rooms, putt-putt, pickleball courts. And the people that offer an outdoor experience, not just an indoor experience, are the people that are winning right now in 2024.
Okay, so tell me if this outlook is accurate, because this is how I've seen it, but I am not
Sure, yeah.
I'm not in Airbnb, and I'm not an expert at it by any means. You have the people. Well, one, when anything's new and early, it's easy to make money.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah,
As
yeah.
more people get in, it gets more competitive. So you have the people that are here to build out Airbnb portfolios that know what they're doing. Then you go into basically 2021, and one, everybody's got a lot more money than they had in 2020
Printing
and 2019,
cash.
right? Two, Airbnb caught traction from a like influential standpoint. It seemed like everyone went, "Holy crap, Airbnbs, I can do this."
Yeah.
And so you had, at least what I think, a lot of people getting into the space that had never invested in real estate prior. They had money. You have really cheap interest rates. They hear about everybody making money in Airbnb. They get one, right? Don't furnish it well. Don't really take photos, and are expecting the market to just produce a return for them. And then what I think happened is, one, managing properties, you can get to a point where it's semi-passive, but it still work when you have properties, right?
Semi, yeah. That's a good way to put it.
So I think people thought that owning properties is completely passive and checks show up, you don't do anything. So it's a little bit more work than what some people thought. And two, I think when interest rates changed and you started to see somewhat of a pullback, those that weren't really trying to build here went, oh, what is going on? This isn't working. And then you had the other ones that are going, okay, this is where I'm going to shine. Is that an accurate outlook?
It's pretty good. Yeah, I think the problem is, and this is sort of my gripe with the industry in general, is that you've got all these like TikTok and Instagram people, that they make Airbnb very sexy. And truly, it is one of the easier ways in the real estate world to make $1,000 to $2,000 a month cash flow. It is. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can do it.
There's a premium on rent, which means from a cash on cash return,
Can be
it's
high.
high.
Yeah.
Multifamily can't even come close to the potential. It's just not.
But
that.
you make a lot more money on the exit, right?
Correct.
And so it's like, I think there's this like, oh man, it's the arbitrage bug. So basically the concept of pitching a landlord on, hey, can I rent your place? And then I'm going to furnish it on Airbnb. And then you make the delta and you arbitrage that kind of that difference, right? And that became really sexy. And, hey, you can get in for $10,000. You can make $10,000 a month and you can live life on a beach passively. And that's sort of this dream that kind of created the wildfire. Now, I say this as a content creator in the short-term rental space. So I got to ride the coattails of that big boom. But I always talked about, hey, it's hard. Well, actually, no. I don't think it's hard. I think it's hard work. But people think it's easy money, and they don't realize to get easy money, it takes a lot of hard work.
Correct.
And that's kind of what happened was a lot of people are coming in, they're like, oh, yeah, I can just furnish it with like, IKEA stuff. It'll be fine. But then it got to the point where we have all these listings. And guess what? Everyone's got a kitchen. Everyone's got a living room. Everyone's got bedrooms. So now it's like, what? Is that couch is leather, that one's cloth? Like, is that really how you're going to stand out? Not really. Now you're getting into that amenities arm race where I'm talking like, okay, pools, hot tubs, and actually providing an outdoor experience. And I think those are the people now that are like, the hardest people to get to actually fix their Airbnb are people that are failing. Totally. I see it all the time. They're like, dude, I'm losing money. I'm like, all right, here's what you got to do. If you listen to me, you will make money. Take professional photos, spend $500. I'm like, oh, I don't have the money for that. I'm like, okay, you need a hot tub. Well, it's $7,000. And like, because they've already lost so much money, they find it very risky to invest any more money because of the sunk costs that they've already had and all that good stuff. So we're in a really interesting time, but I have personally been on a mission to start triaging my own portfolio because I've made a lot of purchases that I wouldn't make today, that's for sure. Right. I've learned the hard way on what's a good purchase, what's a bad purchase. But I'm on a mission of triaging what I don't like, what doesn't inspire me, and investing back into my properties to see, can I pull the lever on design and actually make more money? And dude, the results have been wild.
Yeah, I like that. We're going through something similar where we have a debt portfolio. I don't like it. I do not like lending. I like owning. And so we got to a point where I was like, I'm looking at how much brain damage this business takes on our team and the return. And it just, we got to the point where like, we're done with this. Let's close this thing down. Let's focus on what we're good at.
Is that hard to do? To just turn the lights off? Or like from an operational standpoint?
It's hard to do and it takes time. Like, like think about it. If you have loans and you're active and these loans are paying out in, let's say 19 to 24 months, right? And you just turn it off. Well, one, this thing ain't closing down for 2 to 3 years.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
And then as the portfolio's in wind down mode, you're not bringing on more capital and you're not growing it. So you get to a point where like fees and returns are coming down, but you're still having to spend time running it.
Got it. Yeah.
But I don't know.
Keeping that staff active and
but it's just what you just said reminded me of it. It's like, why are we spending time and energy doing the things that one, don't excite us, and two, I don't think we're the best at. Mm-hmm. Like, I think we are really good at, for us, multifamily and storage. We're really good at developing and repurposing. We are not the best at debt. So why do it? Let's focus on where we're great.
Totally, man. Man, I had a property. I mean, it was breaking even. Sometimes it would make $1,000. You just never really knew. And it's like, it's taking the same amount of operational toll as like this property over here that's doing $5,000 a month. So why am I doing that? So I just sold that. I think we made $120,000 profit because we had it for a couple years. And I'm like, that's pretty good. That $120,000 profit is significantly more money than we were ever going to make from the actual profits monthly on that. So I was like, let's just take the 10 years of cash flow in one fell swoop and then reinvest it. And so like, that's kind of what I've been working on here.
When you're looking at a deal, is there a threshold that you're looking at that will give you the green light of moving forward? And if so, do you look at it on a cash return basis? Do you look at it as like a total IRR or maybe AAR? Like, where is your threshold from a project level return where you go, I like this?
Yeah, it's changed. It changes when you start making pretty decent income, because at a certain point, like I think all investors, there's like a slider spectrum, if you will. There's like a spectrum. That's the best way to put it. On one side, you got cash flow. On the other side, you have appreciation.
Yep.
And in the middle, we'll say like just like that dot, right? When you're beginning, you're on the far side of that wanting cash flow. But the more cash flow you make, the more appreciation starts getting more important to you. So now I'm on that far side where I don't really care about cash flow. I will break even. And you talked about the IRR, and this is honestly the thing that's...
Do you use IRR as the metric?
Kind of in my overall analysis. And this is what I'm trying to like... I mean, it's just basics, right? But I'm trying to publicize this more to people because they're so focused on cash return. So if you think about the premise of what that is, you invest $100,000, how much profit are you going to make on that? If you make $20,000 a year, that's a 20% cash on cash return. That was the golden metric for a very, very long time in the world of Airbnb. I've had properties where I had a 100% cash on cash return.
So insane.
I miss you, 2021, the good old days, when I had a 2.75% interest rate on any property that I bought. I've had 50%, I've had 30. I think right now what's realistic in this space, especially like if you're deploying anywhere from like 75 to 200,000 to purchase a property, you're looking at like a 10 to 20, but really like a 10 to 15% cash on cash return. Now, why IRR is important is because cash on cash return is really just one of the four, pieces of what makes you wealthy in anything in the world of real estate, but in Airbnb specifically, right? So it's like you got cash flow, you got debt pay down, you got appreciation, and you've got, appreciation, and tax benefits, cost segregation, all that good stuff. So those are the four things. Everyone's so focused on cash return that they forget about the other three components that when you add all of that in, actually doubles your cash on cash return. So if you have like a 15-20% cash on cash return, your IRR is probably closer to like, what did I say? If you have a 20, IRR would be like a 35 to 40. And people don't ever think about that. So they'll be like, oh, it's a 5%. I'm like, well, it's actually probably like 10, 15% when you factor in that other stuff. So for me, I'm actually okay with breaking even after all expenses, so long as I can get that cost seg report and, offset my taxes by a decent amount.
Okay, so now you're getting into the side that I really like. Because personally, I care less about cash flow. I want properties of cash flow only because cash flow is the lifeblood of a property,
sure.
Right?
Yeah,
so it shows you how healthy an asset is. So I don't want to be in a scenario where I'm paying the asset to survive, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, it needs to cash flow, but for me, I don't care about it at all. I'm on wealth build. I want my money doubling and doubling, right? But you just talked about something that I love, which is the tax efficiency part. Talk about, you guys are using a cost seg and you're maybe accelerating the depreciation. What are you able to do by doing that?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this.
Make it as simple as possible
right.
So that if somebody's listening that doesn't invest in real estate, you can show how, when somebody says,
sure thing.
I'm a real estate investor and I haven't paid taxes in 15 years.
I'm already sweating because you're trying to get me sued here because I'm not a CPA. But here...
And I'll say this. I have a compliance officer, and these guys know. If anything is said where he doesn't check off, they got to start getting to work on editing.
Can we edit in an insert if I'm wrong?
We got to get to work on editing.
All right, so basically, here's the basic premise. So you have depreciation. The real estate... The tax code is written for real estate investors. So depreciation basically means your stuff breaks down over the course of the life of your investment, and the government's going to give you a big tax incentive for that. Now, typically on a regular like single-family residential, you're getting 27 and a half years of depreciation. So you get a 1/27th of that depreciation every year, a line item deduction on your taxes. But when you do... when you get into the cost segregation side of things, basically what you can do is you can accelerate a lot of that depreciation in that first year and basically claim a massive paper loss. Where it starts to really compound in the world of short-term rentals, where it gets really, really beautiful, is the short-term rental loophole. And basically what it says is if you materially participate in the management of your short-term rental, you can take your real estate losses and apply them to your W-2 income. So if you have $100,000 of bonus depreciation on your short-term rental and you make $100,000 at your job, you can basically take that $100,000 loss, apply it to your W-2 income, and offset your taxes. Now, you're not saving the taxes. It's not like the taxes go away. You're kicking those taxes down the, kicking the can or all that good stuff. You'll have to pay it eventually. But if you play the tax game and you have a good tax strategist, all that good stuff, you can 1031. You can always keep kicking the can until you kick the can
right,
and you die. So what a cost segregation report does is it kind of takes a lot of the components of your property that typically break down, and it basically buckets them into 5, 10, and 15-year increments, and those are the things that you can depreciate faster, and that's all I'm going to say on that. But it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. I think that's mostly
that's good.
Mostly correct.
Yeah, that's good. If you're an investor, it can get you into a position where your income is not reported as taxable, right? Because your loss will be greater than your income. And two, what you touched on, if you're a real estate professional, you can use...
Oh, no.
You have a different
It is
loophole.
different, yes. So, okay. So
yours allows you to touch W-2, where ours just
Correct.
allows us to go what would be considered passive can offset active income.
Correct. So in the world
that's
of
cool.
commercial real estate, long-term rentals, you have to be a rep, right? Real estate professional.
Yeah.
Meaning you have to work 750 hours per year, and it has to make up more than half your time.
Wait a minute. I didn't know this.
Oh, yeah.
So the Airbnb loophole allows you to have a W-2 job with, let's say, commune, and you could have a rental property that you're accelerating the depreciation on and use that loss to offset
Correct.
your
And you don't have to be a real estate professional because
you're
you are
active in the
materially-
business.
Correct. And there are 7 ways to materially
That's
participate.
cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I have a lot of doctors, lawyers, people come to me that are like, hey, I make 400K and I pay 25 to 37% of that in taxes. How do I not do that? So they buy short-term rentals and they basically take those losses, apply it to that, and shoo.
Dang,
Yeah.
that's cool. That's funny. I just had somebody recently ask me, I made this amount of money this year. It was a lot. How can I invest with you to bring that down? And I'm like,
yeah, that's a heartbreaker.
I can't do it. Like,
I know.
I can help you on the passive side. I can't help you on the active side.
And that's the hard thing about raising money too, is that we give away, like when we raise money, you give away the depreciation because it sounds sexy. It's like, yeah, you get this and you get depreciation. But most of the people that invest money with you never get to use that depreciation because they're not real estate professionals and they're W-2 workers that are looking to just invest in your fund.
Yeah, you basically can, you get some passive loss to help with passive gain. So you can
Correct.
make the argument that you can carry it forward and there'll be something there. But for what most people feel,
Yeah.
which is their active income, you're correct.
So I'm curious, from a fund standpoint, when you're raising money, like let's say you want to go and raise $2 million for like a syndication and they're all W-2 employees, would it be a hard pitch to them to say, hey, you don't get to keep any of the depreciation, we're going to keep it all?
Well, they do get to keep the depreciation. It just isn't, they're not able to use it against their active income, right? So they're going to get their K1. They're going to be able to use the depreciation how they want. So if they don't have any gains that year, they can carry it forward to future years. So they can still use the depreciation. It's different than what you're talking about, right? As far as their active income,
totally.
not doing anything for them, but like, let's say, you generated $100,000 loss on your K1 with us, and next year you have $100,000 gain from selling something. Well, it comes into play for you.
Yeah. But I'm saying you can always structure it in the OA, the operating agreement, or whatever set of things to where your side of the company could keep it, I think, right?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well,
that's a question for the attorney. I don't know.
Yeah. For your compliance guy.
Yeah. How we structure it, we don't do that.
Right. Most people don't.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm kind of like, could I structure it that way and be like, look, you're never going to use this. Let me have it. But you can have the cash flow.
I mean, you can get away with a lot if you can get people on board.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying this in the most ethical way.
No, I'm with you. I'm dragging. I'm
Yeah.
dragging. I got a question for you on, I guess it's more on the political side.
Sure. Ooh, okay.
So I'm in California.
Washington. Favorite president of all time.
Right. I'm in California where you used to live. And, I would say, gosh, there's actually a lot to this. one, I live in California. Two, I'm on city council, so I hear a lot of frustrations that residents have with multiple factors of a community. And right now, the number one thing is housing, right? Housing crisis, price of housing, cost of housing. And then you're seeing that kind of spread out into, I would say, a lot of states that are undersupplied, that are maybe more difficult to build. It's off-weighted right now, right? And whenever I talk about on social media, there's multiple things I hear, but one thing I hear over and over is Airbnb. This has been created because of Airbnb, right?
Yeah, that's funny.
So, one, do you know what the percentage of investors that own or the portion of Airbnb that make up the total residential landscape is? And two, how big of a factor do you think Airbnb plays into the cost of living being so high?
I am pretty sure. The last time I looked, it's around 1% of rental stock is Airbnb. It's either 1% of rental stock or 1% of the entire housing supply. But I think it's of the rental stock. It's very small. Now, the impact, I mean, sure, I would say that there are some places that are impacted more than ever, but the narrative is very anti-Airbnb, and no, I don't think that's the real issue. I think the hotels have really stoked that fire, though. That's for sure.
So let's maybe take it a step further now and go into single family, because when you go into single family, there's multiple factors that make up ownership now, right? You have primary residence, Airbnb, small percentage. Investors now, big investors are getting into single family. And what you're hearing from a lot of, at least on social media, is investors shouldn't be allowed to own single family.
Yeah.
Right? Outlaw. I think there's a bill floating around, or they're trying to do a bill in Congress that will make it so that hedge funds have to divest from single family assets in the next 10 years. So every year they got to let go of 10% of their holdings so that in 10 years, no investor owns single family residence, right? Is that a good idea?
I think it's kind of lip service. I mean, that's just like the tax code is written for real estate professionals. So to then like make laws that are very counterintuitive to that doesn't really make sense to me. I think the real solution would be to make it easier to build. Like, dude, I've built stuff in California. I lived here for 5 years. I miss it. Like, I don't live here anymore. I didn't move because of political reasons or anything like that. My family's in Texas. But I built an ADU in Los Angeles. I was like one of the first people to build like an accessory dwelling unit whenever they passed that law in like 2016, 2017. Dude, it was hard. Right. It was really, really hard. And there are a lot of times where I just almost gave up. And I'm like, it shouldn't be this hard to build. I've also built several houses out in Joshua Tree. That's another market where a lot of people are like, Airbnb's ruining this and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, the arguments against it are always so odd to me, because I'm like, well, I'm building this $800,000 house. So the people that are being quote unquote affected would never have really purchased that house to begin with. And I have less of an issue with kind of the way I do it because I'm building it for myself. But at the end of the day, no, I don't really think that's the problem. I just wish that it was easier to build in some of these markets like New York, which is probably not the best example, but San Francisco, California, LA. I wish it was easier to build here. I think that's the real problem.
Okay, so housing crisis, the solution is not government involvement. The solution would be scale back on some of the regulation and red tape and make it easier to build so that more product can go up faster so that we can actually add supply.
Well, I feel like this is a viral TikTok. Someone's going to react to this. They're like, cancel this guy. But yeah, overall, I mean, sure, I think some government intervention is probably fine. But ultimately, I would say if the government made it a lot easier to build in some of these markets, like LA specifically, it wouldn't be as much of a problem.
Right.
But it's really hard.
I mean, that's my view.
Yeah.
Like, I think, like, I'm not somebody who goes, there should be no government involvement in anything. Like, I think there's areas where it's actually important.
Sure.
But I've always taken the stance of the private market does it faster, does it cheaper, and ends up being a better experience for the consumer, in this case, the renter or purchaser, right? So let the market do it. Let the market solve this problem.
I would love to build more stuff, dude. If it made sense, like if it wasn't such a bear to build more stuff out here.
Oh, it's a pain in the butt.
I would do it.
Yeah.
I really would. And then like there's just so many people. I don't know, man. It's weird being. I'm not really on that TikTok as much. I know you are, but those comments, I'm always like, guys,
TikTok is
this is
wild.
not how it works. But like Instagram, YouTube, they're like, you're rude. Why don't you build affordable housing? And I'm always like, why don't you?
Right.
If you're so mad about it, like, I'm like, I kind of feel like the mom and pop sort of like, and I'm gradually moving out of that. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm that anymore. I mean, I don't have that many. I have like 40 units. I don't know, whatever you want to consider that. A lot of people would say it's a lot, but I really don't think it's that many. I mean, I don't think that's really the problem. I could see the argument for institutional investors, but I don't know. I think the thing that I always come back to is that renters always still need a place to live. So I don't see why it's such an issue.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the arguments for it. I get it, but like, I'm like, there's always a need for rentals.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think I think they go hand in hand, right? Like the owning a home has always been, and I think it still is, the American dream. I think like owning a house is still very desirable for even the younger generation.
Big time.
Right? But you definitely are seeing in this time where inflation is running out and interest rates are high in comparison to the price of real estate. Like this is a time where it feels hard to do anything. Right? And you're starting to see, I think, the younger generation that hasn't been through corrections yet and entering the time going, I'm never going to own this.
Yeah.
I'm never going to own a home.
It's hard.
What do you say to them? Like, what should their outlook be? Is it possible? Will things get better?
Totally, man. Look, I don't think, I think it's harder, especially for investors. If like you want to get into real estate, I would say it's harder. But at the end of the day, man, I still feel like ownership is very possible. Like if you're talking about what it costs to get into a property, FHA, first like primary residence loan, you're talking like 3 to 3.5%. That's a very small amount on a $200,000 house, $8,000, something like that. I mean, you're looking at like 7 to 15,000. And granted, I'm not going to say that's not nothing, but I do think that someone who's very serious about ownership, they could save that amount up. There will be a lot of people that listen to this and they're like, you must not live in California. I know the houses here are expensive.
Yeah.
It's harder in some markets.
Yeah.
It really is. So either you got to figure out how to make more money, which I know is easier said than done. And maybe living in Los Angeles or New York or San Francisco or some of these cities where you really want to, maybe that's just not the place where you're going to own the home.
Right.
It's a harsh reality, but it's true. And it's like you might have to just go find a more affordable market.
Okay, so for you were making decent money with, you were at Vanner Media, correct?
Yeah. When I first moved to LA.
Do you mind saying how much you were making?
No, not at all. I was making $80,000.
$80,000 a year.
Yeah.
There. Were you investing or were you building your own real estate yet?
Let's see. At that point, I bought my first house.
Okay. So where I'm trying to get is you lived in California. You were making, like, this is the hard part. In other markets, making $100,000 a year is like pretty freaking good.
Yeah.
In LA, it feels like you're scraping by,
Dude,
right?
yes.
How were you able to buy real estate and then build real estate on that income in such an expensive state?
So at that time we were dinks, double income, no kids, right? So my wife was also making $65,000. She was a teacher, and honestly, she did okay. I think teachers they do okay in LA. I mean, it's still like not enough, right? Teachers are everything, but us together, I think we were doing like 140, something like that. So the reason we were able to do it, though, very important distinction, is because we actually moved from Kansas City. I bought a house in Kansas City for $159,000. I sold a guitar amp, and I got a tax return for like, I don't know, $3,000 or $4,000, and I had enough money to put down. Why I got approved for this loan, I have no idea. Hashtag the big short. But they approved me for the loan. My wife and I bought it, and we lived in that house for 3 years. And then we were really broke, dude. Like I was making 40 there, and she was also at that time, she was nannying, making $12 an hour, and then she got a job that was making 42. So we were making like 80 grand in Kansas City. We were really broke. We had student loans, credit card debt. It was not easy by any means, but we scraped it together. 3 years into it, we were like, hey, why don't we move somewhere? Why don't we change it up? We felt like we got everything we wanted out of the city in a really positive way. And we're like, where should we go? And we're like, how about LA? I don't know why. We were like, yeah, we're broke. Let's go to LA. But we did that. Somehow we doubled our salaries and made a lot more. And we sold our house. It had appreciated from $159K to $215K.
Dang.
So we had $40,000 in our pocket.
That's a lot for Kansas City.
It was, dude. It was crazy. And this was like 2015. So it wasn't even at the boom, right? And I remember I had $80,000, $60,000 in student debt, $20,000 in credit card debt. We're moving to LA. My wife was like, I was like, we got $40K. She was like, should we use that to pay down our student loans? And I was like, we should, but I don't want to, because if we pay down 40,000, we're still gonna owe this like the same amount every month, $1,000. And I was like, that's not gonna change our life. I was like, not immediately. The financially smart decision would have been, yeah, let's pay it down from 80 to 40. But my monthly note was still going to be the same. So I was like, let's just bank it and let's see how it goes. I move into an apartment and I'm paying $1,850 a month for a 666 square foot apartment. I know. I was like, they could have said 665. They could have lied. I would have been fine with it. It was $1,800 plus $50 for pet rent. We had 2 dogs. We lied about only having one. And after living there for 6 months, I was like, dude, I cannot bear to pay a landlord $1,800 for a shoebox. And so I told my wife, I was like, hey, let's buy a house. And she's like, can we afford it? And I was like, definitely not. But I would rather be house poor than paying a landlord $1,800. So we started looking around and we found a house that had a little 279 square foot studio under it. We still own that house today. It's $624,000. And again, we got approved for it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, let's do it. And she's like, can we afford it? I was like, we've got the studio. I think there's this website. You can list your rooms or your like spaces on there and strangers will pay you money to like stay there every night. And it was obviously Airbnb. It was so new to us. And she was like, do you think it'll work? I was like, I think so. Let's see how it goes.
Dang.
And so we bought this house. And what was really interesting about it was we put 3.5% down on $624,000. After a few seller credits and kind of allowances, we paid $18,000. So we actually
18,000 came out of your pocket to do it.
$18,500.
Okay.
So we had the $40,000 banked from the first house that we had, and then we used half of that to buy this house. And I remember, dude, I was so scared to tell people because like it's so expensive. Like that number, when you come from Houston, Texas, and homes are like 200,000. Like I remember my family, my sister, my parents are like, how did you buy it? How much was it? I was like, 624,000. They're like, I felt so dumb telling them that, right? And I remember going to work, and I remember telling my coworkers like, I'm closing on a house, and they're just like, oh, cool. And like you can just tell in the back of their head, they're like, we make more than you. How can you afford this? Like we can't afford it, kind of thing. But I just figured out that house hacking, subsidizing my mortgage with like, renting out spare rooms or spaces in my house. I had done that in Kansas City. And I was like, man, I think if I can pay $2,000 to $3,000 of my $4,000 mortgage, I think I can do this. And that's exactly how it worked out. So a very long answer to your question, but it basically started with I house hacked in Kansas City, sold that house, moved here, house hacked. And I really think for anyone at home that it is absolutely obtainable to own a home. I'm not going to say it's easy. I'm not going to say it's obtainable out the gate. You have to save money. But if you're willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit and rent out spare bedrooms, bonus spaces, whatever it is at your house, you can use that to subsidize your mortgage and actually live like in a house and let it appreciate. And you can actually do that like every single year and keep moving from house to house.
Yeah, that's good. I know even like, you're starting to see a trend where, even our generation, like younger millennials are moving back in with their parents so that they can start saving some money and then put down on a house, right? Like sometimes you just got to do what you got to do to make it happen.
Man, it wasn't the easiest to pitch my wife on that, Like even in Kansas City, it was kind of like, hey, our friend's going to live here. He's going to pay us $400 on an $1,100 mortgage. And she was like, okay, we know him. It's fine. And then I remember he Venmoed me $400 and I was like, oh my God, I'm rich. Like my mortgage is only $700. And then when I moved to LA, same thing. We rented that studio, made $2,000 to $3,000 on that. Convinced a friend to move in with us for $800. And like between all that, I was just like, holy moly! Like if I can get people to pay for my mortgage, I could own houses for free, basically. Right. Obviously, you have to come up with the down payment.
So was that like when I was young? So I bought my house when I was 22, and I got one of those loans I shouldn't have got. 2005, give them to everybody, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I didn't have enough to like really put down on what the down payment should have been. My monthly payment back then was $4,200 a month.
Okay.
It was crazy expensive, right? And I was like, dude, I didn't know what house hacking was, but I was like, I'm gonna have the boys move in, and I'm gonna charge them rent, right? And that lasted a little bit, And then it was like my brother wanted to move in, and I don't know, I wanted to help out my little brother, and so I didn't charge him rent. And then one of my buddies was in there. He's like, "Dude, I'm running back on rent. Like, can you give me a few months?" And then that turned into a year. And then before you know it, it's like everybody's just living in the house for free, right? Do you have a hard time renting out units or bedrooms to people you know? And I guess we'll start with this. Mm-hmm. Do you do that? And if the answer is yes, have you ever been in a situation where they stopped paying, and what did you do?
No, I actually always had friends that I only did it. Well, actually I've done it a few times, but in Kansas City, they were moving for a job that I helped get them. And I was just like, hey, yeah, it's $400. They agreed to it. And then when I moved to LA, I convinced a friend from Kansas City. I was like, dude, move to LA. I'm going to build a tiny house in my backyard. You can live in that tiny house when it's done in like a month. Cut to 14 months later. He lived in our house. So
they always paid rent, never had a problem with it?
Never had a problem, thankfully. But he was also like, I helped him get that job at the agency that we were working at, and he was making really good money. Okay. So partially, I guess maybe my screening was very, very up to par. But no, yeah, I never had that issue.
For Airbnb investors, what do you view as the risks?
A few things. So when someone goes all in on the short-term rental strategy, like I feel like there's a few ways that you can slice it. So I'll kind of for me, the riskiest is always going to be rental arbitrage, right? I don't really like that. There's a lot of ways that can go south.
Break that down just in case we have listeners that don't know what that is.
Yeah, okay. So rental arbitrage, you go to that landlord, you say, hey, landlord, your rent is $2,000. Yes, it is. Okay, great. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pay you $2,000, $2,100, $2,200 if you're cool with this. And then I'm going to furnish it, put it on Airbnb, and I'm going to charge $100 a night. And if I rent that for 30 nights a month, that's $3,000. I'll make $800. Woohoo! Like that's the basic concept. It's really hard to get a landlord on board with that, but you can do it. Lots of people did. It's how I started. That was like one of the things that I did when I launched this house that I was telling you about.
So it allows you to get into the Airbnb game without having to get the down payment to buy your own.
Correct. Yeah, you're just using it's what I call OPP, other people's property. Right. So basically, you leverage their property, the credit that they've put down to finance it. You don't have to worry about CapEx or maintenance. You just worry about bills, and then you spend 10, 20, 30 grand to furnish it. Typically, people in that space are spending like 10. You hear it down. You get business credit. You get business credit, and it's basically free. Blah, 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 whatever. That's what people say. But what you do need is you need the first and the last month's rent. So if it's a $2,000 rent, you still need to come up with $4,000 to do it. Let's say $10,000 to furnish it, $14,000. And in theory, if you do it well, you could make between $700 to $1,200 a month. So it's very appetizing. It's very tempting to do that.
But you view it as the highest risk in the Airbnb space.
Yeah. I mean, there's some exit clauses that you can have, right? So and this is stuff that I didn't know back then, but you could have kind of like hey, I want to write this into the lease where if short-term rentals become illegal, I want the ability to break the contract, or I want the ability to break the lease, no penalty. But even then, at that point, you've spent $10,000 on furnishings, and now what are you going to do with them? Sell them for pennies on the dollar, basically. And I think,
or if you need to find storage,
that's right. Do you know a guy? So that's kind of like one of the main risks. Like the other thing, and this isn't really risk per se, but like you're basically paying their equity. You're getting them the tax incentives, all that good stuff. Right. But I feel like there's just a lot of ways that things can go south. I've been in many arbitrage situations where something broke and the landlord didn't address it quickly, and I had to pay for it out of pocket. And so let's just say like the water heater breaks down or something like that. Well, like that might cause you to refund that reservation, all that good stuff. And you might just you have so many ways of losing money in rental arbitrage.
Right.
Now, the least risky way of doing that would be co-hosting, where you go to that same landlord and you say, hey, you furnish it, you pay for it, I'll manage it, and you pay me 20% of your gross revenue to manage it. And that's way less risky because you're not paying for furnishings. You have no money out of pocket. You're just running the property. And whether that property makes $0 or $100 doesn't really matter. You'll make a percentage of it. Rental arbitrage, if your rent is $2,000, if you make $1,500, you lose $500.
Right.
That's what I don't like about it. Now, a lot of that does apply to actually owning homes, but I think you just have more exit strategies with the home. If you buy a short-term rental, you can always turn it into a long-term rental. You might lose money if you make a bad purchase. You can also sell it.
Yeah, and in theory, your debt service should be cheaper than what the person who you're trying to do the arbitrage with is renting it out for. In
Usually.
theory, it should be,
In
right?
theory, right? But I think when you own it, you just have some options because especially if you own it for a little while, and that's the thing is like some of these risks still apply to owning. Like if it becomes outlawed, now you got this property, but you can also turn it into a midterm rental. You can do midterm rentals and short-term rentals at the same time. You can sell the property, you can long-term rent it. You have a few options, I think, when you own it, but whenever you're kind of using the OPP methodology, you just have less options.
How have you had a property yet in an area or a city that basically outlawed Airbnb?
LA. Yeah. But it actually worked out because
What'd you move it into? A midterm?
midterm rental.
Got it.
Yeah. And midterm rentals circumvent sort of short-term rental regulations because they're 30 days or more. And when you go into that 30 days or more territory, it becomes a long-term rental from most jurisdictions like policies, with the caveat being that when you get into that world, you can have like squatter issues too.
Got it. So the minimum on midterm rental is 30 days.
Yeah.
What's the average stay end up being?
Typically like 90 days. Like it could be anywhere from 60 to 180 days.
And so you keep them furnished. Mm-hmm. And then is there do you see a difference on return or cash return if it's short-term and midterm? Meaning is short-term more cash flow than midterm, but midterm gives you a little bit more security and
Sure.
less rotation?
So let's think about that spectrum again, right? So long-term rentals, midterm rentals, short-term rentals. If you're talking about like, let's just say long-term rentals are 1x, midterm rentals are typically 2 to 3x revenue, and then short-term rentals are typically like 3 to 5x. So if a long-term rental is going to make $1,000 a month, midterm rentals are going to be 2 to 3, short-term rentals are typically going to be 3 to 5.
Got it.
In that scenario. Not always, but that's kind of like my rule of thumb. And but it's like based on how much you work, right? So long-term rentals, the most passive, the easiest to manage, so you make the least amount there. Midterm rentals are kind of in between. When you have someone in there for 30, 60, 90 days, not really as much of a big deal because they're really not going to call you all that often. They're way less picky, but still more management than a typical long-term rental. Right. Thus, you make a little bit more. And short-term rentals are the most work. You have 5 to 7 sets of guests per month, whereas with the midterm rental, you have 3 to 5 guests per year.
Right.
And so short-term rentals, you're just dealing with a lot more people. You have a lot more expenses. You have a lot more cleaning fees. There's just a lot more management that goes into it. But because of that, you make the most amount of money.
Got it. Are you only doing this single family? Are you doing it with multifamily as well?
Not yet. I'd like to. My perfect dream scenario is kind of doing like the trifecta. So I think a really great model would be to have like a 20 to 30 unit apartment building where a third of them are long-term rentals for stabilization. A third of them are midterm rentals, and then a third of them are short-term rentals, and then you stabilize that for 1 to 2 years, and then you sell that basically at a juicy cap rate. I haven't done that yet, but man, I always want to. Yeah. Most I've done is like a duplex or a triplex.
Okay, we're doing our first co-living apartment right now.
Nice. Okay. Cool.
So I will let you know how that goes.
Is that like a rent by the room?
Yeah,
of thing?
you rent. Yeah, so you basically you fully furnish them. You have like a maid service that's cleaning, and then you tag the lease to the bedroom as opposed to the unit. And it's usually a shorter term rental than what we're typically seeing on some of our traditional multifamily. There's a premium to the NOI for us, about 20% increase. So you see the opportunity, especially if you're building in California, where it ends up being cheaper for the tenant for like a brand new kind of amenity rich Class A product. And then for the builder, because it's so expensive to build here, you actually get a little bit of an increase. But that project, we're completing it. It's 102 beds, and it'll be done this summer. So I will let you know how it goes. This will be our first one.
Yeah.
The last question that I want to end on. We had Gino the Ghost come on here.
Great name.
He's, his personality matches the name. He's like he's a really like fun and entertaining just person to be around. And, how I got connected with him, he had a video that went viral, and it was someone from like the entrepreneur influencer space talking about how to get rich by owning basically 10 properties before you're 30. And if you can just do that, you'll be fine. And his pushback was like, oh yeah, I'll just go buy 10 properties, right? And the overall point is you have to have money to buy real estate. You mentioned arbitrage where, you do need some upfront capital if you're going to do it, to the first example.
Yeah.
On the second example, I can't remember what you talked about, but it's almost like you're getting paid a management fee.
Co-hosting, $0 required there.
So that's an opportunity for you to potentially get in the game without having money.
Oh, yeah.
What are a couple other options that we could end on for kids that are going, I want to own real estate. I would love to have 10 properties. But I'm check to check right now. I don't have the money to put on a down payment. What are a couple options we could leave them so they can get to a point where maybe it's like you, they get 40 properties.
Yeah.
Maybe it can go more.
Okay. All right. So like how to break in low to no money down, right? Okay. So there's arbitrage. We talked about that. The risk. One of the risks I didn't say was the owner of that property could sell it. That's a big one. That's actually one of the bigger ones.
Dang, I didn't even think about that. That's obvious.
Yeah. There's a lot. I have like a whole list of them because I don't like it. But with this said, I have 4 arbitrage units. So I do it mostly so I can educate people my way. But they could sell it. There's co-hosting, which is the freest way, by far the best. You can go and partner with somebody. You can basically go look for a dumpster outside of a house where someone's renovating it and say, hey, what are you doing? I'd love to apprentice. I'd love to work for free. And then if I prove myself, maybe on the next one, I can manage it for you, make 10%. I don't do this, but I know a lot of people that make a ton of money doing this. This is how they started wholesaling. Okay. You can basically get a house under contract for $300K and sell it to an investor for $325,000, make a $25,000 spread. You can get into creative finance. We didn't even talk about that in this podcast where, you can literally get in for no money down. I've been a part of a lot of deals where someone buys a property, they bought it a year ago, they have no equity and they lose their job or they have to move suddenly and they're willing to let you just take over the mortgage for free, take over the payments, but it's a whole thing. Sub 2. Right. What else could you do? Yeah, I mean, those are house hack. That's very low money down. Again, 3 to 3.5% of $400,000, super obtainable. But at the end of the day, like the more money you have, the easier, right? So like when someone's like, I want to get it, I have no money. I'm like, go save your money,
Right.
like go save 10 grand, go save 10, 15 grand. And if you can do that, I think if you have like $10,000 to your name, you can go to an investor and say, hey, I've got nothing. I've got this 10 grand. Let me put this into your deal and let me work and show you that I want to do this. Because if someone's like, I got no money, but I'll help you. I'm like, okay, well, there's not really anything at stake for that person. But if they like, I've got 10 grand, I'll put it into your deal and then you can teach me. I don't really do that now, but I'm just saying that would show me like, all right, they're putting everything on the line to actually learn and take this seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. That I think it doesn't get taught enough that if you know how to find deals or how to connect investors with deals, you can make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a personality type that's maybe more analytical, you don't want to be front facing, you don't want to be selling. Okay, good. You're going to be basically running the numbers on the deal. Maybe you're managing it. You're more of the operations. Mm-hmm. Then you're going to have your extroverts, right? They're the people person. They're going to be the ones with the relationships with the brokers that are helping you find the deals, or they're going to be the one talking to the investors who always are looking for investments. Mm-hmm. These people have money. They're not out here calling owners going, will you sell me your property, right?
Totally.
They just want to make a return on the money. And if you can partner with, if you're the extrovert with the introvert or vice versa, you now have a team that can go find assets to bring to investors. Now all of a sudden you're getting paid. But what I love about what you said is before you know what you're doing, go work for somebody. Go get involved. Give them money that's part of the deal and have sweat equity be what you're learning. Like, be creative. What I would say successful people love more than anything is finding young kids that remind them of themselves.
Big time,
when
dude.
they didn't know anything, but they were hungry and willing, right? They will take you under your wing if they see something in you that reminds them of what it was like when they started.
I mean, and I say all this with like, try to provide value to someone, because I think that, like, what is not appealing to me is someone that's like, hey, Rob, I'll work for free for you. I don't know anything. I'm like, okay, well.
It's more energy for you.
You just created a lot of work for me because I got to mentor you so that you don't mess up, right? But if they're like, hey, I am really good at negotiating on the phone and cold calling, I'm like, great. You can save me many hours a day and cold call contractors for me or vendors for me. So it's like, what can you actually offer someone that's appealing? Because like, hey, let me pick your brain that's not really all that appealing for me. And let me just say, like, for anyone listening to anything I'm saying, they're like, oh, easy for you to say. I actually started with very, very little money. I kind of showed you some of my path, but then I ran out of money very fast. What I did was I was super scrappy and I was like, I'm really good at this. So I went to my best friend. I'm like, dude, I found it. I'm making he's my now best friend. We weren't then, but we were good friends. I was like, dude, I found it. I'm making $1,000 a month doing this. He's like, how do we do it? I'm like, I don't have money, but if you can fund it, I need like $5,000 and we can do this. And he was like, great. And then we went and we pitched his mom. Okay, that's where people are like, oh, well, must be nice. Great. Step one, have a rich mom. But we went to the best type of private money lender. We raised money. We bought a condo using that money. And then I would post about it. I would talk about my journey on the internet. I didn't have a platform. This is just to my personal friends and family. And guess what? I had several friends that reached out that were like, hey, that Airbnb thing is cool. Like, how do you do that? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can consult you for free, or maybe we could partner. And they're like, well, how would that look? And I was like, well, you could just ask me questions and I'll show you. Or I don't know, if you fund it and, like take out the loan at the bank, like I'll run it. And they were like, yeah, let's do that.
Percentage of it, totally.
Yeah, and they were like, yeah, let's do that. And then I did it improv in LA at UCB, and I remember we were going around in a circle introducing ourselves. And everyone's like, hey, I'm John, I'm a poor actor. Hey, I'm Jan, I'm a poor model. And then they're like, what about you? And I'm like, I'm Rob, I work in advertising and I do Airbnb on the side. And they're like, what are you doing here? You're not one of us. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I remember we did a show and we bombed and we went to a bar afterwards. And one of the guys in that circle came up to me and goes, hey, dude, that sounded pretty cool. And I was like, yeah. He's like, I got money. I work a W-2. I want to learn what you do. He's like, I'll pay for it if you teach me how to do it. And I was like, sounds great. So we built a house together. We sold it a year later, made a $400,000 profit on it. And now he builds them out in Joshua Tree and he makes 6 figures doing it every single year. So I didn't have the money to do it. I never had the money to scale, but I found people that saw that I was good at this. I marketed myself by talking about it. I showed people that I was very serious about this, that I had done it, and I'd put everything on the line to build my portfolio. And they believed in me and they invested with me. And that's how I've gotten from 0 to 40. So it is possible. Now I started with more money than the average person, of course, but like, not really. Like I was really broke for most of that, really.
Where can people find you to follow you, learn from you? What are all the channels?
Okay, so you can find me over at on YouTube at Rob Built. I am the largest Airbnb YouTube channel out there. You can find me every week, a couple times a week, on the Bigger Pockets podcast. I'm the co-host of that show. Instagram Rob Built, and I have a conference in the short-term rental space. If anyone's interested in getting in the room with 600 people, you can learn about that over at hostcon.com. I'm doing that in August, and man, really excited to do that for the 3rd time in a row. We sell it out every
Where's
year.
the conference?
It's in Houston, Texas.
Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
All right.
You're gonna speak the next one.
Guys, go to this one. Let me know how it is. I will definitely be at the next year. Thank you so much, man.
Of course,
this was awesome.
Thank you.